They called him a harmless old farmer. But in 1942, on a quiet Pacific island, Henry Crawford used nothing but mirrors, sunlight, and a spark of madness to break the sky. Beat. He didn't fire a bullet. He lit the air on fire. By 62, Henry Crawford had made a sacred promise to himself. No more war. He'd served as an engineer in World War I. Mud, wire, the thunder of shell fire, and he'd come home carrying ghosts. He crossed half a world to keep them quiet, settling with his wife, Alina, on a small farm in the Solomon Islands, a hillside of green above a blue, forgiving bay. His life narrowed beautifully. Fingers in soil, nets in the dawn surf, chess on Thursdays with Father Michael at the church. The island was a prayer of palms and wind, a place where days were measured in shadows on the porch, not in minutes to the next bombardment. But in 1942, the Pacific caught fire. Japan surged across the sea. Guadalcanal, just to the southeast, became a battlefield. And one humid morning in March, the sky over Henry's farm began to growl. He looked up from the chicken feed and counted 12 planes, neat as stitches, sliding northwest. Red circles, Hinamaru, on each wing. And then they were gone, replaced by a silence that felt too heavy to breathe. They came again the next day. And the next? Reconnaissance flights, bomber returns, fighters shepherding the damaged back to base. Low, predictable, relentless. The war Henry had outwalked was now flying straight over his roof. Sleep turned thin. Henry began waking before dawn, haunted by trenches that weren't there, by names he couldn't forget. Alina would find him on the porch, watching a sky that should have been only blue. "You can't carry this war alone," she'd whisper, setting a hand on his shoulder. "I'm not," he'd say. And both of them would listen to the lie. He tried to keep his rituals. Rows of taro, a net cast just as the water blushed pink, a puzzle solved in 3 moves at Father Michael's table. But every pattern in his day now had an echo overhead. The engine note, the shadow crossing the bay, the red circle. Then, one clear morning, a lone Japanese reconnaissance plane knifed along the coast at maybe 500 feet. As it banked over the bay, sunlight shattered off the water and stabbed the pilot's eyes. The plane wobbled, just for a heartbeat, then steadied and moved on. Henry lowered his binoculars. The idea hit all at once, like a door kicked open. A flash to blind. Heat to snatch the wings. Not firepower, physics. He started to laugh. A raw, surprised sound that pulled Alina from the kitchen. "Henry?" "I know how to stop them," he said, eyes bright with a long-ago fire. "They'll think I'm mad, but I know how." He began 3 days of reconnaissance, watching, timing, sketching. The Japanese were using visual navigation, pilotage, common in 1942 over the vast Pacific. Follow the coastline. Use landmarks. Descend low to confirm what the maps can't tell you. It was efficient. It was predictable. And at low altitude, it was vulnerable. The bombers returning damaged dipped to 800 feet or less. Recon planes skimmed at 500 for better photographs. At those heights, the air itself could become a weapon. Reflected light could ambush their eyes. Sudden thermal updrafts, columns of rising hot air, could pitch a wing without warning. And if both happened at once? Henry went to Father Michael, the unofficial bridge to Allied advisors. Soon, Captain Robert Morrison arrived, lean, exhausted, skeptical. "You want to do what?" Morrison asked, after hearing the pitch. "Not shoot them down," Henry said. "Confuse them, blind them at a critical moment. Then let the atmosphere do the rest. Mr. Crawford, we're fighting a war, not hosting a science fair." "Give me a week," Henry said. "Give me 2 men and scrap metal. If I fail, I vanish back to my vegetables." Morrison hesitated, and then nodded. "You have 7 days." On a narrow run of cliff that funneled low-flying planes like cattle in a chute, Henry built his trap. He salvaged mirrors and polished tin. He shaped and angled them into reflection arrays, so a signalman could throw a wall of light into a cockpit. At the exact instant a pilot hunted for the horizon, he painted large metal sheets, matte black, with a mix of tar and charcoal. In the tropical sun, they baked to blistering heat, creating invisible chimneys of rising air. Thermal columns. At 800 feet, a wing snatched by a sudden updraft becomes a bucking animal. The instinct is to correct, overcorrect, stall. Private Tommy Chun and Corporal Mike Sullivan, Morrison's reluctant helpers, watched the old farmer work. He calculated sun angles. He scribbled windroses. He tested flashes against a clock he'd carved into the cliff with a nail. By day 3, the jokes had died. "Old man knows exactly what he's doing," Sullivan muttered, hauling another panel into place. "Looks like my grandfather on the railroad," Chun said softly. He could see lines no one else could. On the 7th day, at 14:28 hours, Henry heard the engine. He checked the time. "Right on schedule. Target from the southeast," he called, binoculars up. "Altitude 550. Speed 180. The reconnaissance plane slid into view, hugging the beach, the red circle clear and cruel. Array 1. "Now!" Light poured from the rock face in precise angles. The plane dipped, wobbled. The pilot's head jerked, hunting for the horizon. "Array 3!" A second cross angle of light sliced through the cockpit as the aircraft hit the first rung of hot, rising air. The left wing lifted sharply. The nose yawed. And then the nightmare happened fast. The plane rolled. A palm tree whipped the wingtip. Metal barked. The aircraft cartwheeled, kissed sand, and settled broken on the beach. No one spoke. Morrison lowered his binoculars slowly, face gone pale. "Holy Mother of God," he whispered. "You brought down a plane with mirrors and hot air." Chun, Sullivan. Henry was already moving. "Medical kit! Now!" The pilot lived, broken leg, bleeding scalp, stunned eyes, and was carried to the village clinic. Morrison turned to Henry, respect replacing skepticism. "I owe you an apology." "One plane," Henry said, voice steady. "Now we build 5 more." Word sprinted through Allied command. Within 3 days, Henry's hillside farm became a field lab. Engineers arrived with spools of wire and crates of glass. Soldiers hauled lumber up goat paths. The islanders volunteered, weaving nets, hauling water, sharing shade and stories. 6 sites, each tuned to its geography. Coastal corridors where bombers limped home. Inland valleys where recon planes skimmed for photographs. Arrays mapped to the sun's arc with tables Henry wrote by hand. Thermal panels expanded to 200 square feet per site, tested at midday to hit surface temperatures that warped the air above them. On day 8, Installation 2, Chun's site, caught 3 bombers returning from a raid on Allied positions near Guadalcanal. The lead aircraft, already wounded, hit the hot updraft and rolled. It plowed into a coconut grove, miraculously not exploding. The 2 wingmen broke formation, panicked, and burned extra fuel, taking a longer, safer route home. "That's almost as good as a kill," Morrison said, studying the map. "Fear adds miles. Miles drain tanks." By day 15, all 6 installations were live. The web was woven, and the enemy felt it. The Japanese adjusted. They climbed to 1,500 feet. They shifted flight times to avoid peak sun. Escorts flew tighter. Recon crews were told to be quick and keep high. Henry gathered his team under a lamp that smelled of kerosene and heat. "The physics don't scale much higher," he said, tapping the sketch of a rising column. "We can still blind, but without turbulence it's less effective." "What if we make them come down?" Alina asked quietly from the door. Everyone turned. "Give them something they have to investigate," she said. "Make the ground interesting." Her idea was wicked and brilliant. They built decoys, island fish nets, dyed and patterned, looked like camouflaged equipment from 1,000 feet. Canoes with fabric frames cast shadows that read as trucks or guns. Scarecrows in surplus uniforms, posed in rows, became troops. The masterpiece was the Phantom Base, a fake depot arranged in a valley directly below an array site. Empty crates stacked like munitions, logs painted as anti-air batteries, tarps slung just so. From the sky, crucial. From the ground, nothing at all. The next cloudy morning, a recon pilot took the bait. He dropped from 1,800 to 700 feet to confirm targets. The arrays fired. The hot air clawed his wings. Inside that gray light, instruments lagged. Instincts screamed. He stalled, then fell into the trees. This time, there were no survivors. Henry stood on the ridge, jaw clenched. "Target destroyed," Morrison said. "Clinical by necessity." "That's 7. 7 young men," Henry whispered. "And 7 families who will wait for news that will never come." He didn't celebrate. He just went back to work. Pilots began to whisper. Ghost lights, cursed valleys, places where the air caught your wings. Some refused certain routes. Others climbed higher and burned the fuel that would have gotten them home. Japanese command fumed, rotated crews, ordered escorts, and still the losses mounted. Night flights came. Moon-bright evenings let reflections work in a softer palette. Thermal columns held heat even after dusk. The web kept catching. By the end of week 3, Henry's network had downed or forced the landing of 15 aircraft. Not all crashes were near the arrays. Some happened miles away. Pilots too shaken, too fuel-starved, too blind in their heads to find a runway. Every tally was a victory that felt like grief. Henry's eyes grew more tired. But his hands kept building. Then the storm came. Allied radar and scouting reported the largest raid yet. More than 80 Japanese aircraft, bombers in disciplined Vs, fighters snapping at their edges, tracked straight toward Allied positions on Guadalcanal. If they threaded the islands clean, the damage would be catastrophic. Henry checked his maps. He breathed once, twice. He pressed the radio key. "All installations, this is command. Bearing 145, altitude 2,000. Descend expected before the bay. Primary targets are the bombers. Maintain operations until you're fired upon. Then live." The first shadows arrived at 09:15. The formation began its descent just as doctrine demanded. Bombing runs at 800 to 1,000 feet increase accuracy and vulnerability. Installation 3, engage. Sullivan's cliffside arrays exploded into brilliance. Pilots blinked hard and too late. One bomber ran wide. Another rose into its wingman. The 2 clipped and fell in a ragged confetti of metal over the water. 2 down, Morrison reported, voice tight. Fighters dove. Angry hornets, stitching the cliff with gunfire. Mirrors shattered. Rock chipped. Sullivan's men ducked, then stood again, angling the remaining plates with bleeding hands. Installation 2, draw fire. Chun threw a second wall of light from the north. The formation frayed. Some bombers climbed, ruining their runs. Others pressed lower, straight into the shimmering heat. One bomber flipped and went in, a brutal hammer of jungle and flame. Another entered a flat spin, wings tearing away under aerodynamic stress. 4, 6, 7, Morrison counted, voice rising. "Henry, this is working. It's working until they change the game," Henry said, scanning. "They'll go for the sights." Right on cue, a lance of fighters peeled toward Chun. Tracers stitched the hillside. Leaves shredded. A mirror burst into glittering shrapnel. "All installations," Henry snapped. "Maintain operation as long as possible. Then abandon equipment and take cover. Lives over glass." On the southern flank, the bomber stream shifted course, trying to slip between installations 4 and 5. Henry's finger tapped the map. "Activate decoys." Fake anti-air positions blinked into being. Plumes rose from staged cook fires. The bombers saw urgency where there was none. They dropped lower, hunting targets, rolling steady and doomed. Installation 4, fire. Installation 5, cross light now. 2 curtains of sun slammed the valley. The thermal columns, heated since early morning, reached up invisible and vicious. Planes lurched. Lead pilots lost the horizon. Bomb racks cycled early. Bombs tumbled harmlessly into trees and sea. 10 down. 12. 14. Then the call Henry had waited for. They're turning back. The sky turned messy. Bombers jettisoned payloads and clawed for altitude. Fighters broke off to find any place to refuel. By the time the last engine note faded, 23 Japanese aircraft were gone. Not a single Allied position had been hit. The island exhaled. News raced across the theater. Commanders stared at the numbers. Analysts ran out of language and settled on awe. Japanese debriefs, when captured, heaved with superstition. Valleys of demons, cursed sunlight, invisible hands. Henry just fixed a broken hinge on his back gate and sat with Alina on the steps. "You saved lives," Morrison said that evening, voice gentle. "I took some too," Henry answered, not looking up. That's the part no one prefers to count. Even so, the work continued. Henry agreed to train teams in his methods. He mapped sun tables. He lectured on pilotage, dead reckoning, and cockpit psychology. He taught how glare erases a horizon, how heat can trick an airframe into betraying its pilot, how fear multiplies mistakes. By the end of the campaign, the 6 sites had accounted, directly or indirectly, for more than 60 Japanese aircraft removed from action. Crashes near the arrays, forced landings, collisions during evasive maneuvers, fuel-starved failures after extended detours. The Japanese never quite solved the riddle. They avoided the worst corridors, but each detour added minutes, and minutes burned fuel that victory needed. And then the guns fell quiet. After the war, teams dismantled the arrays. The mirrors came down. The black panels cooled for the last time. Vines reclaimed the bolt holes in the rock. The cliffs went back to being cliffs. Henry returned to the life he'd fought to preserve. He rose early, checked his rows, set his net. On Thursdays, he played chess with Father Michael. The board's quiet logic suited him. Bishop to e4, sun to angle 7. Everything was geometry and patience. Journalists wrote, and he declined. Publishers called, and he demurred. When pressed, he'd shrug. "I was just a farmer who didn't want war over his house," he'd say. Anyone with a little engineering could have done it, but everyone who'd seen the web knew better. It wasn't just engineering, it was nerve, imagination, the stubborn refusal to surrender the sky. He lived to 95. When Henry Crawford died in 1975, the local obituary listed farmer and veteran. It didn't mention the day he broke an attack without firing a shot. It didn't say Operation Reflector. It didn't count the saved lives. But on clear afternoons, when the light slid across the headlands just so, a bright shard would leap from the rock and skip across the bay. The elders would nod toward the glint. "That's old Henry's magic," they'd say to the children. Of course, it wasn't magic. It was science and courage. It was empathy and resolve. It was a mind that looked at a problem and saw, not a weapon, but a way. In the Solomon Islands campaign of 1942, aircraft navigation often relied on visual landmarks and dead reckoning. Cockpits had limited instrumentation compared to today. A sudden glare could erase the horizon line. A thermal updraft, especially over sun-baked rock, could shove a wing up hard at low altitude. Combine those forces, and you make a pilot's job not merely difficult, but impossible. Henry didn't invent the sun. He simply learned to speak its language. That language saved lives. In a world that often measures power in noise, Henry Crawford proved that silence can be stronger. He showed that knowledge can be a shield, that imagination can be a fortress, that one person, old, tired, and done with war, can bend the course of violence without ever touching a trigger. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse the shape of the fight you're given and redraw it with light. Remember that. The next time the world grows loud, look for the glint on the cliff. Look for the idea everyone calls impossible until it works. This was the story of Operation Reflector, of mirrors, heat, and a farmer who loved his home more than his fear. May we all find a little of Henry's courage when the shadow passes over our roof. And may we always remember, sometimes the brightest weapon is the sun. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs proof that ingenuity and heart still matter. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon. and your mind on the light.